BJP calls Nitish Kumar insensitive. External Affairs Minister S. Shankar shuts down China and Pakistan, tells Pakistan that nation which hosts terrorists like Osama bin Laden has no place to sermonize at the UN.
The challenge of terrorism, even as the world is coming together with a more collective response, multilateral platforms are being misused to justify and protect perpetrators.
Shah Rukh Khan breaks his silence and controversy over his latest song Besharam Rang and the calls to boycott his film Pathaan, says social media is driven by narrowness of views.
Social media is often driven by a certain narrowness of view that limits human nature to its baser self. I read somewhere that negativity increases social media consumption.
India. The latest information coming in on the top of Newstrack is that India has successfully test-fired its China missile, the Agni-V. The ballistic missile has a range of 5,000 to 5,500 kilometers. It's the fifth in a series of medium and long-range nuclear-capable ballistic missiles that have been developed by India. This missile test will be one of China's key worries, as the missile can very easily cover the landmass of China, extending to several parts of Europe and even Russia. Shiv Arur joins us. There are very few people who understand missile systems quite the way that Shiv does. Shiv, 5,000 to 5,500 kilometers. Where all can this missile travel to? And is there anything to be read in the timing of the test launch of Agni-V?
Rahul, by many stretches, this is the longest and longest range missile test in the history of India's strategic weapons program. Nothing has ever come anywhere close to this. We've tested weapons out to about 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers. This is the first time the Agni-V, which is our longest range missile, has been tested to its complete operational range, which is about 5,500 kilometers. Like you rightly said, at that range, it covers every part of China, large parts of Russia, many parts of Europe. Basically, all of the threats that India could possibly have around it are covered by this. Of course, we should mention that this is not a conventional weapon. This is a nuclear delivery system, Rahul, in the sense that it is meant as part of our nuclear command and our strategic deterrence. It's capable of delivering a 1.5-ton nuclear payload to any of these locations if deemed necessary. Now, the timing is interesting, Rahul. Remember, a test of this kind is pre-planned very many months in advance. So I wouldn't read too much into this test happening now, just a few days after Tawang. I'm sure many people are tempted to to look into it as a message. But these strategic tests always do have their message, because remember, tensions between India and China have been on for more than 2.5 years now. They began in May 2020, and so everything that has happened since then has some kind of subliminal link with what's happening on the frontier with China. And remember that the Agni-V has an unofficial moniker as India's China missile or China-centric missile. While India does not, of course, profess to point its nuclear weapons at any country, the very range that has been tested today, the maximum range, makes it pretty clear to anyone looking, Rahul, that this is in fact a China-centric weapon system. But as I said, it's a nuclear deterrent, and as per our nuclear use policies, this weapon, if ever, God forbid, it needs to be fired, will only be fired in retaliation.
There's also a massive Yudh Abhyas that's currently on, an Air Force demonstration of its power. Again, planned in advance, but very clear muscle flexing in the skies this time by the Indian Air Force.
Very true, Rahul. Planned in advance, but very much in keeping with the fact that China has been expanding its air power capabilities, as well as, poking airspace, sending drones in, sending helicopters very close to Indian airspace over the last many weeks and months. So even though it is not linked directly to what has happened in Tawang last Friday, it's very much to do with the fact that China has been hiking up tensions, ratcheting up the situation as far as, helicopter bases, creating new airfields, sending its air assets closer and closer to Indian airspace, not just in the eastern sector but also in the central sector. So this air power demonstration and exercise, even though planned very much in advance, has a lot to do with how China has, in a runaway manner, been expanding its air power infrastructure. So that definitely has a much closer link to the Agni-V test.
Thanks, Shiv. We'll come back to you for more later. As tensions escalated in Arunachal Pradesh with the clash between the Indian and the Chinese army, there's been an uneasy build-up going on in the Doklam region, the site of a 73-day-long standoff in 2017. The Doklam face-off in 2017 at the India-Tibet-Bhutan tri-junction triggered a show of strength from both sides. The Chinese are still holding on to territory in Bhutan, which is not to India's liking. India Today gets you the full picture, showing how China is trying to increase its control of the region. Will this turn into another potential standoff? Ankit Kumar from the India Today Open Source Intelligence team and Abhishek Bhalla, who heads our National Bureau, collaborated to file this report.
Doklam, the site of 73-day standoff between India and China in 2017. 5 years on, and at the back of escalated tensions in Arunachal Pradesh, the spotlight has shifted back to the India-Tibet-Bhutan tri-junction. Could Doklam be the next flashpoint? The Chinese are still holding on to territory in Bhutan, which is not to India's liking. Intelligence reports suggest that Chinese have beefed up infrastructure across the borders. About 9 kilometers from the India-Bhutan-China tri-junction, China continues to expand its presence in the Bhutanese territory. Pangda village, set up in 2020, has witnessed expansion in the south. A set of new buildings along with a bridge over the Torsa water body can be seen in the recent satellite imagery analyzed by India Today. They also show more ground clearance further south of Doklam. In the cluster of new villages approximately 20 kilometers from the border in the north, called Langmarpo, being set up by China in the Bhutanese territory, rapid construction continues. These areas include Saiburu, Kaitangsha and Kwil. The over 2-month standoff that was resolved in August 2017 was triggered after Indian troops stopped the Chinese road construction in Doklam. While the Chinese are constantly increasing their firepower, the Indian Army is making efforts to match up. The Indian Army has also been enhancing its infrastructure and pushing its deployment forward. With the two sides just meters away and India concerned about China's new construction, including a critical bridge, tension is simmering and could lead to another standoff. With Ankit Kumar and Abhishek Bhalla, Bureau Report, India Today.
After the setback it suffered at Yangtze, China is trying to take control of strategic heights in the area. It failed to do so on the 9th of December, but China has been building up in a big way on its side in Bumla. The Indian forces on the ground are prepared. Gaurav Sawant, India Today's Strategic Affairs Editor, with this ground report.
Days after the Dragons' failed incursion in Tawang's Yangtze region, the Chinese army is beefing up its presence in other regions. Sources tell India Today, after the Indian army foiled the PLA's attempt in Yangtze, China has deployed its army in the Bumla sector. India, however, enjoys the upper hand here.
At an altitude of about 14,000 feet, the India Today team is currently in the Tawang Bumla sector. We are on the Tawang Bumla axis. The army is deployed here in numbers. After the Chinese army failed in Yangtze, the information was that the Chinese are building up in large numbers in Bumla. Again, high altitude, again with a history of 1962, but lessons learned, the army is deployed in numbers. Along the way, there are some gun positions, some 155mm howitzer positions, but we are not showing those positions to you as they would compromise security. There are bunkers of the forces, both of this time and some of the older bunkers of the 1962 war can also be seen around here. The army is deployed here in good numbers and there is some troop movement that is also taking place. Simultaneously, there is an air exercise that is on. The Eastern Air Command is carrying out its command level exercise.
The waterfalls and lakes along the Yangtze-Tawang Bumla axis are a major reason behind China's incursions. The Tibetan population living here considers the water from these lakes and waterfalls holy.
At an altitude of about 12,500 feet, the India Today team is currently at the Sangatsar Lake. This is not very far from the line of actual control. In fact, the waterfalls and holy lakes in this region are one of the principal reasons for the friction between India and China. Now, lakes and waterfalls around Yangtze. Now, Tibetans on the other side of the line of actual control also consider this extremely holy. The Tibetans on this side, they visit these holy waters and they pray there. Now, India dominates these heights. If you look around, look at those jagged peaks right behind me. These altitudes are anything between 12,500 go all the way up to 17,500, and this is where the army is now deployed in big numbers. India Today is the only channel to come so close to the line of actual control near Bumla, in Tawang, on the axis to Yangtze. Now, these are three different axes where we are reporting from ground zero to be able to get you an assessment of the deployment on the Indian side and the preparedness on the Indian side. That preparation is whether it's the infrastructure development, building civilian areas also. In fact, at the Sangatsar Lake, while you see a lot of military deployment, you also see civilian vehicles here, because the effort of the administration here is to ensure that civilians, whether in Arunachal Pradesh or from the rest of the country, also are stakeholders in protecting India's territorial integrity. And that is why the Sangatsar project is extremely significant. Religion, strategy, military and location. Multiple reasons why China is desperate to come into this area. Equally important, why India is very keen to hold on to this territory, and this leads to friction. There are about 8 friction points in this area. Yangtze perhaps the most sensitive of those 8. But even now, there is massive deployment. That's what sources are telling India Today.
The local Tibetan leaders in Tawang believe that China desperately wants to change status quo along the LAC in order to control these lakes and waterfalls.
Multiple waterfalls and 108 lakes in this part of Tawang form the bone of contention between China and India around the line of actual control in this region. Now, these waterfalls and lakes are considered holy by the people of Tibet. They are on the Indian side of the line of actual control. People from Tibet want this holy water. China has desperately tried to control the 108 lakes and the waterfalls. It is said that one of the spiritual leaders of Tibet had sprinkled his prayer beads, and wherever those prayer beads fell, 108 lakes were formed in those areas. The people here worship this water. China has repeatedly tried to take control of the access to these lakes. China has repeatedly failed, like it did at Yangtze.
Sources tell India Today the Indian Army has done a major deployment in the Tawang sector. With both the countries raising their presence, a de-escalation won't be easy. With Gaurav Sawant in Tawang, Bureau Report, India Today.
With the clash at Tawang, the call to boycott Chinese products is growing again. The Aam Aadmi Party is advocating a complete trade ban with China. The Congress is asking, why are trade relations with China increasing? Why is India continuing to import more from China? Can the two Asian giants afford a full-on trade war? Can the Indian government put additional curbs on trade with China? Take a look at this report and then we get into our big debate tonight.
चीन से आयात बंद करो, बंद करो, बंद करो। चीन से आयात बंद करो, बंद करो। हमारे दुश्मन से आयात बंद करो।
Anger surges in India once again over trade with China. This after troops of the two Asian giants traded blows once again. The wave against Chinese products that built up after the Galwan clash has begun to resurface again after the latest flare-up along the mountain border in Arunachal Pradesh.
आप एकदम से चीन के साथ खरीदना बंद नहीं कर सकते, लेकिन जो आइटम्स हैं, प्लास्टिक है, फर्नीचर है, खिलौने हैं, जो भारत देश में पहले से ही बनते हैं, आप उनका आयात बंद कीजिए। फिर धीरे-धीरे फेज वाइज एक दीर्घकालिक योजना बना के चीन के सामान का बहिष्कार करना पड़ेगा।
The anti-China backlash has begun to crest in political circles. AAP chief Arvind Kejriwal has pushed the idea of an economic warfare against Beijing. His close lieutenant Sanjay Singh has sought to corner the Modi government over trade ties with China.
मोदी जी को सामने आकर इस देश की जनता को बताना पड़ेगा आपकी क्या मजबूरी है, कौन कौन सा व्यापार आप करते हैं, कौन कौन सा व्यापार आपके मित्र पूंजीपति चीन के साथ करते हैं, क्या दबाव है। आप पूंजीपतियों के चक्कर में भारत की सीमा की सुरक्षा के साथ समझौता करेंगे? आप नहीं बोलेंगे, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मंचों पर सवाल नहीं उठाएंगे।
India and China have long been critical trade partners. The total merchandise trade jumped 34% to around $116 billion in the 12 months to March 2022. But Chinese imports to India outpace exports. The trade deficit, which stands at around $51 billion in the first 7 months of the current fiscal alone, has begun to echo through political circles.
ट्रेड इम्बैलेंस इतना है, चीन के फेवर में ट्रेड इम्बैलेंस है और हम सिर्फ टिकटॉक बैन किए।
2 years ago, India banned dozens of mobile apps, including the Chinese ones like TikTok. But the ballooning trade between the two powers suggests the economic response to their border tensions has remained measured. A full-on trade war must not be in anybody's interest. Bureau Report, India Today.
Can we increase the restrictions on trade with China? What are the specific areas that can be targeted? Why are imports continuing to balloon despite the fact that post-Galwan, the government has tried hard to try and reduce trade with China? Joining us on this broadcast, representing the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, its national spokesperson Sanju Verma, squaring off against her, Supriya Srinath of the Congress. For an academic perspective, I'm joined by Professor Santosh Mehrotra. He's at the University of Bath. He's a visiting professor at the Center for Development. Ashwini Mahajan joins us, very important man, national co-convener of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, an affiliate of the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. Prasanjit Bose joins us for a left-leaning perspective. He's an economist and activist. I want to start by asking Sanju Verma that post the Galwan clash, the government made very clear that it would use economic tools to try and choke trade with China, to make it tougher for China to send exports to India, that it will try and reduce Indian imports from China. That, however, doesn't seem to have happened. Instead, trade from China is increasing, imports from China are ballooning, and trade data seems to suggest that your policy of reducing trade with China hasn't worked. Why is that, madam?
You know, Rahul, before answering your question, I think today is an exceedingly proud moment for every Indian, you, me, and everybody on the panel, that we finally successfully did that test trial of Agni-V, which has a range of more than 5,000 kilometers, which I think is no mean achievement. Coming now to the crux of your question, I have some data with me You can verify this data with the economic survey put out by the government of India from time to time. The trade bilaterally with China for the financial year 2021-22 was $115 billion. In financial year 2020-21, it was $86 billion. Now, the moot point which your audience needs to know, and please listen to this very carefully. In financial year 2020-21, what was the overall size of India's trade basket? When I say trade basket, I mean basically our exports plus our imports. The value of our exports plus imports in financial year 2020-21 was $686 billion. Now, what was it in financial year 2021-22? It was $1,028 billion. The limited point I'm making is, in financial year 2020-21, if out of $686 billion, we did a trade of $86 billion with China, that is basically only 12.5% of our entire trade basket, point number one. Point number two, if in financial year 2021-22, out of the total trade basket of $1,028 billion, we did a trade bilaterally with China of only $115 billion. It means with China, we only did trade to the tune of 11.18%. Just 11% of our total trade in financial year 2021-22 was done with China. What is the moot conclusion that we arrive at? In the last 2 years, our overall percentage of trade with China is less than 15%, barely 11 to 12%. So why this whole brouhaha? Now I will just take 30 seconds to tell you why is it that you cannot blanketly, and I'm sure some of the professors on your panel will be happy to corroborate me, why you cannot blanketly ban Chinese imports or export goods and services to China. India has been a signatory to the WTO right since its inception in 1995.
Okay.
We have also been a signatory, 20 seconds, we have also been a signatory to the Geneva Convention of 1949, the GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, of both 1948 and 1984. Now, since we are a stakeholder in these international platforms, you cannot unilaterally...
Okay, so you've set the stage for this debate. Supriya Srinath, there is WTO obligations. Secondly, this will hurt India as well, because if we block trade, China would lose only 3% of its exports, 1% of its imports. India will lose 5% of its exports, 15% of its imports. Those are big numbers that you'll have to deal with. Secondly, while the percentage of trade has gone up post-Galwan, as a percent of overall trade, Sanju Verma makes the argument that China's share as a trading partner to India is actually coming down. So directionally, we're headed in the right direction.
No, I want to first raise a few points, and the good thing with data is that you can't circumvent reality. Now, what is the reality? The reality, as pointed out there, was that it is 11% now, it was 12% before. What happened after Galwan? After Galwan, this country was told, and very many people, especially the Bhakts, went ahead and destroyed their phones, TV जला रहे थे, phone जला रहे थे. मोदी जी ने भी आंख में धूल झोंकने का काम किया और कुछ ऐप बैन कर दिए. You know, all of those apps that he banned actually has donated to the PM Cares Fund. We are not debating that today, I understand. I'm not going to get into the...
Talk with certain respect.
Okay, Sanju, let us speak. Sanju, let us speak. Go on.
Please do not speak. Do not speak in between.
Supriya.
Do not speak in between. Do not speak in between. I will not let you... Rahul, if you're okay with doing this debate while she was rambling and I did not speak, I'm fine with it. I can leave and you can have a 1 hour conversation with her. I did not interfere. She should listen to the hard truth. PM Cares Fund mein blood money from these Chinese startups that supposedly were banned in India was taken. Not a word on that. There are 3 broad figures that this country needs to understand. $115 billion in 2021-22 was the trade volume with China, $86 billion the previous year. But this government actually inherited a trade deficit. The trade deficit last year, when we were doing a trade with China of $115 billion, the trade deficit was $73 billion, because we were obviously importing more from China and exporting less. China, the total trade that China has with us is just 3%. We have over 11%. The trade deficit was $73 billion. But this same trade deficit, they inherited at $36 billion, which has more than doubled. So you have increased India's dependence on China year after year, particularly after Galwan, it is up 35%. Do you have an explanation for that? After Galwan, our trade deficit and our trade dependence on China has gone up, and the trade has gone up by 35%. Is there an explanation? And that's not all, Rahul. We are not just debating import and exports. I think the one thing that we are not paying attention to is the amount of Chinese money there is in Indian startups, that entire community that we want to grow and we must grow. Over $14 billion of Chinese money is actually fueling our startup ecosystem. You know how much was it the year before that? $4 billion.
Okay.
So imagine if China wants to play truant, how our entire startup community can come crashing down, the entire economy.
Ashwini Mahajan, as the national co-convener of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, if we leave the politics between the Congress and the BJP aside, the fact is that post-Galwan trade has gone up by 45%. The fact is that the trade deficit is going up as well. The fact is the government's trying to curb trade with China. It hasn't worked. Are you satisfied with where things are? What are your suggestions on what more should be done to try and curb trade with China? Many, like the professor on the show, Professor Mehrotra, would say it's also impractical.
See, Rahul, I would like to give you the history in 2 minutes, and then we can go ahead with this. Since 2001, when China joined WTO, the imports from China, they had been going up and up. And between 2004 and 2014, I'm not talking about the politics, but we have to understand the insensitivity of the governments of the day, like earlier governments and today's government, that has actually led to the increase in the imports and the trade deficit with China. Between 2004 and 14, there was a 3,000% increase in the Chinese imports. And that, especially when we allowed that to happen, we were very proudly saying, as a nation, as a country, as a government, that the imports are at a cheaper rate, and why we should not allow the cheaper goods to come into India and satisfy consumer wants and make our country more competitive. Actually, that didn't happen. It led to the deindustrialization of the country. API industry, telecom, electronics, plastic, everything. We continued to import, and our industries continued to be killed. And we reached at a juncture that we didn't have any industry to support us. And then it was said that, oh, China is indispensable, we have to depend upon China. Even today, there are people, those who keep on saying that if we stop imports from China, then our industry will not be able to survive, because most of the inputs, most of the intermediates and raw material is coming from China. But we have to put a full stop somewhere, sometime, and this is the right time that we do that. And the government of the day, they had.
So what are you specifically suggesting be done? Kejriwal says there should be a ban on trade with China. Do you go to that extent? Do you think more restrictions should be placed on what we import from China?
We have to, whatever we suggest as Swadeshi Jagran Manch or as a responsible organization, it has to be according to the international conventions and other things. But yes, the government of the day, previously they were they were not understanding the impact of the Chinese imports and they were not raising the tariffs. From 2018, they started raising tariffs, and we have seen the results. We have seen that the imports of electronics and mobile phones that has come down, and rather exports have increased. But the sufficient has not been done. But later on, when the government came out with the Atmanirbhar Bharat production linked incentive scheme, basically production linked incentive scheme for all 15 sectors which have been chosen, is basically designed to control imports from China. And that is the point where we started. But the problem here is that the tariffs are still very low. I tell you, Sanju was talking about WTO and others and everything. I would like to tell the audience through you that our tariffs, the bound rate of tariff is 40%. And we are actually imposing tariff at the rate of about 10%. So there is a scope of increasing tariffs. And while talking to industry, we have found that even if we make a slight increase in the tariffs, that can do wonders. We have talked to the textile industry, we have talked to many other industries, and they are all saying that if we double, say from 10% to 20% on an average, we do, that can do wonders. And secondly, what we have to do is the under invoicing from China is rampant, and we must stop it. Under invoicing, we see every day and night that all kinds of goods. Today, Caesar industry people were talking to me. They were saying that the under invoicing is to the extent of 2%. So this is huge loss to the nation, and we must stop it. Coming to that point, we must raise tariffs. We must stop under invoicing, and in the longer run, we must see to it that imports from China should become zero.
You want imports to become zero? But Santosh Mehrotra, let's look at the top commodities India is importing from China. Chemical products, plastics, organic chemicals, boilers, machinery, machine appliances, nuclear reactors. A lot of this simply isn't available in India. It's not as if the government isn't trying to reduce imports, it is. But industry requires these chemical products, these plastic articles, organic chemicals, a lot of the pharma APIs coming from China, which are required to be able to make our industry move. How practical is it to implement the kind of suggestions that Ashwini Mahajan and his ilk are making?
And not particularly practical, with all due respect to my very good friend Ashwini ji. Yes, in certain simple consumer goods, like the trader on your show actually talked about plastics, toys, furniture. I think we can begin by, banning and perhaps reducing. But I think really for the capital goods that you just mentioned, and especially for the active pharmaceutical ingredients, unless we build up a capacity in our own chemicals industry, which we used to have and we lost, I think it will be impossible to actually reduce that. Let me just mention a few things in response to what I've heard so far. I want to tell your entire audience that between 1992, after the economic reforms began, and all the way till 2014, the contribution of manufacturing to GDP was 16 to 17%, and consistently so. In other words, manufacturing was rising at roughly the same rate as the GDP was rising. The GDP was rising at a rapid clip of about 6.5% in the 90s. And in the period from 2003-4 to 14, it was growing at 8% per annum. So this government inherited a manufacturing contribution to GDP of 17%. Since the last 6 years since demonetization, manufacturing contribution to GDP first fell from 17% to 16 to 15 before COVID, and then it fell to 13 and then 12. So never in the history since our economic reforms began has manufacturing contribution to GDP and manufacturing employment actually fallen in absolute terms. So this is an outcome of the rather poor management of economic policy and of rather poor definition of whatever Make in India means. PLI, we'll wait to see what the benefits of
But
that are.
it takes time. There's a bit of a lag between coming up with new policies, getting manufacturing plans
let me talk about, I understand,
and ultimately seeing the output. Just stay with me for a minute. I want to go across to Prasanjit Bose on the point that was made about banning certain visible consumer goods. For example, plastic toys, diyas, furniture. So you can't ban chemicals or pharma APIs. Those are very complex. They'll have a spiral effect on the Indian economy. But there are certain things that people use which you know comes from China, like Chinese Ganeshas, Chinese Diwali lights, Chinese consumer toys. Ban those. Send a message. It's symbolic for sure. The value of that trade as a percentage of overall trade with China is very low, but it's a message going out across the Himalayas that this is something we're trying to deal with. Would that serve a purpose or would it largely be notional?
It won't serve any purpose. I think that those who are arguing on these lines are completely ill-informed. And I think that first of all, we need to place this debate on the basis of accurate and correct data. The largest components of India's imports from China comprise of electronic commodities, electronic, like laptops, like, integrated circuits, like batteries, which we use for our computers. Now, these are, I think that, anybody, and many of these are intermediate goods. So they are required to make other goods. They are also going to contribute to India's exports as well. Now, unless and until, what is the real problem? I think that we are reacting to it in a way that the government and its spokespersons and its supporters often react, which is, without any rationality, without any logic. The biggest problem is that why is India unable to make good quality laptops, good quality integrated circuits, good quality lithium batteries, good quality APIs and other pharmaceuticals and organic chemicals at competitive prices, which is the only solution through which you bring down imports from China. You can't do it, and you are unfortunately providing an apology for the government, which has 6-7 years ago announced its intention to develop India's manufacturing through Make in India, which is a complete flop. A complete flop. All the apologists of the government should, first of all, the Prime Minister himself should beg forgiveness from the country for the biggest, flop of his manufacturing policy at a time where we have become, where the government is officially saying that our India's manufacturing sector is going to be developed, and we are witnessing a burgeoning trade deficit and a deindustrialization.
Okay. Sanju Verma, forget the overall percentage. The fact is trade deficit is going up with China. That would suggest that a lot of your talk around PLI, Make in India, etc. hasn't at this moment delivered results. The talk is more than the action, alleges Prasanjit Bose.
Rahul, may I please, because it's Rahul, can you please ask this gentleman to keep quiet? Mr. Bose, I did not heckle you. Please extend the courtesy to me. Rahul Kanwal, may I make my point?
Sanju Verma, please. Sanju Verma, please.
Thank you. Rahul, it's a lopsided debate, I see. But anyways, let me make some very important points. I will debunk what, and very politely with data, what Professor Mehrotra said and what Prasanjit Bose said. The key ratio is not manufacturing as a percentage of GDP. What you need to see is gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP. Under the Congress-led UPA, the gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP had fallen to an abysmal low of 23%. And Mr. Mehrotra, today the gross fixed capital formation as a percentage of GDP is 32.9%. Point number one. Point number two. Now let me debunk what Professor Bose said. Private final consumption expenditure, PFCE, which denotes the purchasing power of the private sector and to a large extent various stakeholders in the economy. What is PFCE as a percentage of GDP today, Rahul? It was less than 57% under the Congress. Today it is 63.9%.
Okay, Santosh Mehrotra is having a laugh at what you're saying. Just one second. Since you've made some arguments, let Santosh Mehrotra come in and respond to what you're saying. I'm coming back to you in a moment. Professor Mehrotra.
Yeah, so as far as investment to GDP is concerned, if you look at it historically, our investment to GDP peaked at 38% of GDP in 2008, and this government inherited an investment to GDP ratio of 31%. Since 2015, or rather 2016, investment to GDP has come down. The more important point is that Sanjuji has not listened to what I said, that manufacturing contribution to GDP has actually fallen. And the most important point, I think, and my very short point, is the following, that this government has not adopted an industrial policy. I'm sorry to say even the previous government, after coming up with a manufacturing strategy in 2011 and an electronics design and manufacturing strategy in 2012, was unable to implement it. Its term ended, and this government for the last 8 years has not come up with a industrial policy. Make in India is not an industrial policy. It's all about ease of doing business and come make in India, meaning encouraging FDI. Well, you've seen what the impact of encouraging FDI has been, that our trade deficit with China has been increasing. Now, as far as the 3,000 product tariffs that have been imposed since 2014, well, why is it that our imports of manufactured products have been going up, as Rahul, your reports have been repeatedly saying? So quite clearly, the 3,000 product tariffs that have been imposed by this government are not working. And finally, CII and FICCI have been saying for at least a decade that eliminate the inverted duty structure that we have in this country. What is an inverted duty structure? Very briefly, it means that the tariffs that you impose on finished products are low. That's why finished products, consumer products, and also capital goods are flooding into the country from China and from other countries, while intermediates and raw materials have a high tariff. This is completely illogical. Which are intermediates or raw materials which can be used to produce those same products inside the country, those have a high tariff. This is absurd. This needs to be corrected. CII and FICCI have been saying this.
Okay, Ashwini Mahajan, respond to Santosh Mehrotra's argument that at least at this moment, schemes like production-linked incentives, schemes like Make in India haven't had a material difference in the trade data. You can see some green shoots. Those green shoots will take time to develop and fructify. At this moment, the data speaks for itself. The trade deficit with China has actually grown further.
See, Rahul, you have cut all the trees, and when you need more fruits, you say you have seeded the trees, but so far it has not come. It's true, it has not come. I have told you about first of all, I would like to take objection to what Prasanjit had said, that we are laymen, we don't know data, we don't understand trade. Professor, you must not say all these things. Let me tell you, as I have already said, that during 2004 and 14, during that period, since there was a huge increase, and we have been listening to the speeches of the leaders then. Nobody was talking about that. Our industry was being killed. Our API industry was killed like anything. You see, we had 90% of the API requirement being met by our Indian producers. And by the time we reached 2014, 90% we were importing. So what to say? So when we don't have APIs, then how can immediately you start it now?
So let Supriya Srinath respond to your point. You make a very important argument that some of these things take years to set up again. You've planted a tree, it will take time for fruits to come. The fact that we don't have pharma API is not something that gets reversed immediately. It's a work in progress. It will take time before results are visible. Quick final words, Supriya Srinath.
So I will just say two things before I move on to your question, and I'll take 10 seconds to say them. 16 lakh people in this country have renounced their citizenship under the very rule of this government that tells you, and these are mostly high net worth individuals, they're not putting the money where their mouth is, they're not believing in your policies. So that explains why investment is low, and actually gross fixed capital formation is 27% under you. It used to be 32% under us. Just putting the record straight. Your point is well taken, Rahul. Yes, it doesn't take, it can't be done instantly. There has to be a policy, but the policy cannot be to ban apps but increase trade elsewhere. The policy cannot be to ban apps and accept money in the PM Cares Fund. The policy can't be to actually crowd out the Indian investors and crowd in the Chinese investors in the startup ecosystem. And very briefly, I will say, false bravado on China has to stop. The government has to take cognizance of the situation, because actually they are funding what China is trying to do at the LAC. There is no other
Sanju Verma, final word that there should be lesser talk and bravado and a more realistic and pragmatic approach about the need for trade with China. While you can try and wean yourself away, it's a very long and arduous process, and that's the communication, rather than saying you're trying to stop it or reduce it.
Okay, I'll just quickly say a couple of things. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. The biggest success story of Make in India is the Covaxin. Apart from that, Samsung has opened in Noida in 2018, one of its biggest facilities outside of its home country. Look at Apple. Apple's exports this year from India are set to touch 20,000 crore. Maruti Suzuki sells more than 5 cars every minute, showing the purchasing power that the Indian consumer has. And I will tell you one more thing, Rahul, one more thing. Please, one more thing.
Sanju.
Supriya Srinath sits here and gives a bhashan. I challenge her. Please divulge the contents of the MOU that Sonia Gandhi signed with the CCP in 2008. What was Rahul Gandhi doing? Flirting with the Chinese ambassador at the
shut up, yaar. Your Prime Minister went for 18 times. What was he doing? What silly argument?
Rahul Gandhi was flirting with the Chinese at the height of the Doklam.
18 बार गलबैया कर रहे थे. क्या कर रहे थे प्रधानमंत्री जाकर? आंख नहीं दिखा पा रहे. लाल शर्ट पहन के गाल मिल रहे. अरे चुप रहो. बेवकूफ औरत बकवास करती आकर.
You are a stupid.
हाँ, लाल आंखें दिखानी थी. लाल शर्ट पहन के गले नहीं मिल रहा था. एक महीने पहले गले मिल रहे थे ना जब मोदी जी, तो लाल आंखें दिखानी थी. LAC पर आके झड़प करते हैं. ये उनको पैसे भेज रहे हैं. गद्दार कहीं की. चुप गद्दार.
Okay, this is degenerating. One second. We can't. I'm sorry, I cannot allow the standard of this debate to go straight down to the gutter. We're trying to have a substantive conversation on the problems of trying to reduce trade with China, which is clearly something every fair-thinking Indian would want. There are serious challenges. The challenges need to be overcome with time. We've had some good suggestions. We've also had a bit of tutu meme, and that is just the heat of the moment, the political back and forth between the government and the opposition on the spiraling trade deficit with Beijing. We're slipping into a break. When we come back, a breakthrough in the Shraddha murder case. Bones and bloodstains recovered match her father's DNA. What happens to Aftab now?
भैया जी हमला. भैया जी 10 गोलियां ले ले.
गोलियां नहीं रज्जा, गोली.
पर बाहर तो 10 लोग हैं.
10 हो या पूरी बस, अब तो बस 1 है तो डन है. इसको कोई वॉच कराओ. जब वॉचो मिले ढेर सारे OTT ऐप्स एक ही प्लान में, तो हर कोई बोलेगा वॉचो 1 है तो डन है.
वॉचो प्लान स्टार्टिंग एट जस्ट 42 रुपीज पर मंथ. आज ही सब्सक्राइब करें और पाएं सिलेक्ट प्लान्स पर 1 महीना कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री.
India Today exit poll silences all.
The BJP is set to record history in Gujarat.
Projected total tsunami in Gujarat.
The biggest ever BJP victory in Gujarat.
Only poll calling Congress win in Himachal.
Congress 30 to 40 seats in this election.
Validated, vindicated, victorious. When you are an outlier, it shows. No herd mentality, 100% courage and ability.
Access My India Today group exec poll. Once again.
Strength of conviction proved again.
We have the most accurate pollster with us.
The only pollster picked it absolutely bang on.
The gold standard of getting it right.
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices. Amplify your brand with 100 million smart internet viewers. To advertise, mail us at sales@aajtak.com.
You're on board the Newstrack. There's been a big breakthrough in the sensational Shraddha Walker murder case. The DNA of Shraddha's father has matched with the bones which were recovered from South Delhi's Mehrauli forest area. The bloodstains found in Aftab's kitchen and bathroom have also matched. This is incriminating proof against Shraddha Walker's killer, Aftab. This is where I wrap up the Newstrack tonight. For your time and your trust, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye, good night.
December 2022, the India-China clash in Yangtze Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. But this time, bully Beijing was schooled with full aggression. Overwhelmed and overpowered,